Mother refuses to speak to me because I'm getting a tattoo of my cats, which she believes is irresponsible. I'm 19, and for as long as I can remember, I've wanted tattoos. As soon as I was old enough, I started dreaming up designs and mapping out exactly what styles speak to me. Now, after months of planning, I'm finally ready to get my first tattoo, a small piece on my upper inner arm featuring my 2 cats. These cats have been by my side since I was a kid. They were there through the hardest periods when my mental health was in shambles, and I was just struggling to make it through school. I honestly can't imagine life without them, and as they grow older, I feel more and more compelled to keep a part of them with me forever. That's why I just know this is the perfect first tattoo for me. I'm actually typing this with them both curled up right beside me. I've already contacted a tattoo artist who's now working on the sketch, and I am so freaking excited I can barely sit still. But here's where things get complicated. My mom. She's my best friend in the world, truly. There is no one closer to me, but she absolutely hates tattoos. It's pretty much the only thing we don't see eye to eye on. When I got my eyebrow pierced a few years ago, she was so upset she didn't talk to me for a week. Eventually, though, she accepted it, or at least tolerated it. I'm always upfront with her, especially about things this important, because we hardly keep secrets from each other. She's always known I want tattoos, and she knows there's nothing she can do to stop me. But she also makes it clear she isn't going to like it or support it. After I turned 18, I actually decided to wait on getting a tattoo. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to make sure my mom was feeling good about life, her job, her personal stuff before I added anything potentially stressful to her plate. Things weren't bad for her, but I still didn't want to do something that might make things harder on her. Now that things have moved forward and I'm working with the artist, I told her today that the tattoo will be happening soon. The shift in her was instant. She can barely look at me now. She told me she can't imagine anything more ridiculous or irresponsible, said I'd be ashamed, and insisted I haven't really thought this through. I know a lot of her views come from a generational place, but it just stings when she tells me it's stupid and that I'm not being thoughtful about it. It's not as if I'm getting some random thing just because this tattoo has deep meaning for me. She told me that once I get the tattoo, she won't talk to me for a while and might not even be able to look at me. Knowing that absolutely shatters me. She's my rock. I struggle if we go even a day without talking because of work or travel, let alone her going silent purely out of anger and disappointment 4 days, maybe longer. The thought of it genuinely breaks my heart. Have them on my side either. It's going to suck, especially because I have to admit I'm really, truly close with my parents, even if you wouldn't guess that from all this drama. The 3 of us spend a lot of time together, not because I have no friends, I promise, I do, but because we genuinely like each other's company. I know it's going to be incredibly hurtful if they pull away from me over something like this, but ultimately, I'm happy I'm doing this for myself. I'm excited to start this new chapter. Update 2. To answer some lingering questions, I want to clarify upfront that I'm not Jewish, nor do I come from any particular religion or culture with strict views against tattoos. That's not the source of my concern. I'm Australian, not American, and when I talk about the generational gap with tattoos, it comes from where and when my parents grew up. My parents were raised in somewhat upper-class areas in the 70s and 80s. They had me later in life, and according to them, tattoos were mostly for people who had been to prison or the military, though honestly, I'm pretty sure tattoos were more common even back then. After my first update, I mentioned I was especially anxious about telling my grandma and older auntie, believing they shared my parents' views. Yesterday, I had lunch plans with the 2 of them, and as I was leaving the house, my dad pulled me aside. He said my mom wanted him to remind me very emphatically not to say a word about my tattoo to my grandma, something about her being 89 and not needing that kind of stress in her life. My mom was picturing her own mother, nearly 90, from a conservative background, and overlooked the fact that my relationship with grandma is, well, different. She's one of my fiercest supporters. When I came out as a lesbian a few years ago, she accepted me instantly. We even chat almost weekly and laugh about all sorts of teenage drama, and she genuinely enjoys it. My mom just forgot how close we really are. So, over that lunch, with my heart pounding, I decided to just come out and tell my grandma and auntie about the tattoo. And honestly, they totally surprised me. They were so chill about it. They both said tattoos aren't their thing, but they saw how important it was to me and were genuinely happy to see me doing something that made me happy. They even wanted to see the design. My auntie, who's an incredibly talented artist, actually offered to sketch ideas for my next tattoo. Both of them told me straight up, if things ever get tough at home with my parents, their door is always open for me. I just love them so much. Then came today, the big moment. I finally got my first ever tattoo. I'm completely obsessed with it. My artist was fantastic and turned the whole process into a genuinely fun experience. Leading up to the appointment, and even today, I made sure to give my parents space. I didn't bring up the tattoo, didn't announce the appointment, nothing. I didn't want it to feel like I was being defiant or rubbing it in. When I got home a couple of hours ago, things were normal. We chatted about random things, keeping everything light. Finally, my mum broke the ice and said, "Well, how did it go?" I replied that the session went great, the artist was wonderful, at which point Mum interrupted, "Are you going to show us or what?" So I just lifted my sleeve. They were totally silent for a moment, leaning in to inspect the tattoo. My dad spoke first. "It's bigger than I thought." Mum followed, Much bigger," with this kind of grimace, "but honestly, whatever." My dad at least seemed a little interested. He asked if it hurt and how long it took. After that, I just excused myself, hugged and kissed them both goodnight like it was any normal evening, and went to bed. Now I realize I'm just going to keep acting normal, because it is normal. Their opinions don't have to dictate my choices, and while I let the anxiety snowball in my head, this really isn't a disaster. This is my body, my decision, and I'm so proud I did this for myself. Honestly, the support from my family, even if my parents aren't thrilled, means the world. My grandma and auntie's encouragement especially helped me push forward. If you could see the smile on my face right now, looking at my beautiful new tattoo, you'd know I have no regrets. Update. Free. Woke up this morning with that odd mix of soreness and giddiness. My arm felt warm and tight under the second skin, and the boys kept nosing at it like, "What's this new thing on our human?" I made toast, acted normal, and Mum hovered around the kitchen like a moth, doing everything but looking directly at me. She made coffee, put it down, picked it back up, put it down again. Finally she asked, "Does it hurt?" And when I said, "Not really," she nodded like that answer had somewhere to go inside her. I ducked out late morning to show Grandma and my auntie in person, because photos just weren't cutting it for them. I barely got my sleeve up before Grandma grabbed my wrist, peered close, and actually teared up. "They look so alive," she said, and then she did the last thing I expected. She rolled down her sock, stuck out her ankle and went, "Well, now I don't have to feel like the only scandalous woman in the family, do I?" There, on her left ankle bone, faded to a whisper of blue, was the tiniest wave. Like a child's drawing of the ocean. I stared and went, "Excuse me?" And my auntie just burst out laughing because apparently she's known for years. Grandma told us the story like she'd been waiting to tell it. She was 17, snuck out with her best friend at King's Cross in the 50s, and there was a girl in a boarding house who did little tattoos with a sewing needle and India ink. "We wanted anchors," she said, "because we thought we'd run off with sailors," and then she cattled. The girl looked at us and said, "You'll regret an anchor, have a wave, at least it keeps moving." So they had waves. Tiny, secret waves. My auntie added that Mum never knew because Grandma always wore stockings around her. "She'll be furious it survived this long," Grandma said, patting her ankle, "but it has, and I'm still me." I don't know what possessed me, but I texted Mum a photo of Grandma's ankle and a single wave emoji and then my cat's. She didn't reply, but later, while my auntie sketched the lightest wattle branches next to my heeled band to show how a second piece could wrap without crowding the boy, she gets so lost in her lines. It's beautiful. My phone pinged. "Mum, where are you?" Which from Mum isn't "come home immediately" so much as "I'm going to say something and I prefer to say it while looking at your face." When I got back, Dad was out the back oiling the deck and pretending not to be waiting for me. He waved me over, dorky little half smile, and wordlessly handed me a brand new tube of Bapan and this massive, ridiculous straw hat. "For son," he said. "And I was rough the other day. The money thing. I know how hard you work." He didn't quite meet my eyes, but he squeezed my shoulder and went back to worrying with a splinter like it had insulted him personally. It was a lot, in a good way. Mum called me into the lounge and there was an album on the coffee table I hadn't seen in years. Not one of the glossy wedding or baby ones, but a battered old thing with those clingy plastic pages. She sat right on the edge of the sofa, and patted the cushion next to her like we were about to watch a nature documentary. "I didn't know about your grandmother," she said first, very flat. "She never told me." Then she flipped the album open and there he was, my Uncle Paul, Mum's little brother I've only ever heard about. Hair like a haystack, grain too big for his face, sitting on a Honda he definitely wasn't supposed to have. And under the plastic, in this one photo where his t-shirt rode up, a flash of a dragon, that looked like it had been done with a biro. "We were so different," she said quietly. "He was wild and funny and infuriating and never where he said he'd be. And he adored that stupid dragon." She kept her finger on the page, not quite touching him. "He crashed when he was 19. And my parents, well, you know what they were like, they decided it was all part of the same rot. Motorbikes and tattoos and bad choices. She let out a breath, like she'd been holding on to it since 1982. I don't hate tattoos because I think you will become something. I hate them because they feel like a door I once watched my brother walk through and not come back. I didn't know what to say. I just reached for her hand. She didn't look up at me, but her fingers tightened around mine in that automatic, mum way, like she was plugging something back into its socket. I looked at you last night with that picture on your arm, and all I could see was the beginning of a story I already knew, she said. And then your grandmother's ankle shows up on my phone and I realize maybe I don't know all the stories. She still doesn't like it. She told me as much. But then she asked me if it would be okay if, for brunch with her friends next weekend, I wore something with sleeves so she didn't have to deal with Julie from the tennis club and her very important opinions. I said that was fine. Compromise isn't surrender, sometimes it's just kindness. And then, unbelievably, she said, if you're going to keep getting these things, I choked but didn't argue, you need to be careful in the sun. You'll be out with your cousins all summer. She disappeared into her sewing room and came back an hour later with two slim little arm sleeves she'd just whipped up out of breathable fabric, one plain black and one the most ridiculous cat print you've ever seen. She wrinkled her nose at that one. I couldn't help myself, she said. They are softer than those UV things at the chemist. You don't have to wear them. But, there. It's such a mum solution, still assertively disapproving, but also thinking of 3 versions of my practical comfort before I've even worked out how to wash the second skin off without crying. We ended up sitting on the floor with the album between us, and I told her about the way the artist dotted their little whiskers and how the shading under their paws makes it look like they are mid-pounce. She listened. She actually asked to take a photo so she could show Grandma the good lighting. She didn't zoom in on the skin, she zoomed in on their faces. As for the boys themselves, because the universe loved timing, one of them threw up on the bath mat right as we were about to make dinner. Mom and I did that silent telepathic co-op where one person corrals the offender and the other Googles how much vomit is normal like it's a quantifiable science. I rang the vet to be safe, and Mom drove with me, saying nothing, just putting her hand on my knee at traffic lights. He's okay, just a hairball epic enough to register on the Richter scale, but sitting there in the little exam room with his silly offended face pressed against my chest and my new tattoo peeking out of my sleeve, Mom brushed his head and said, almost to herself, all right. I see the point. The artist messaged me too, asking if they could feature the piece in a small show raising money for a local cat rescue next month. I said yes immediately, of course, and told Mom after. She made a face, then asked, will there be finger food? Which is her way of saying she'll come if there's something to do with her hands. I told her I didn't know. She said, there'd better be, and that was that. I've got my sleeve on now, the plain one, because the cat one is honestly unhinged and the boys have finally stopped trying to groom the second skin like it's an alien blister. The house feels normal again. Except every now and then I catch Mom looking at my arm the way you look at a new piece of furniture that someone swears will make the room and you're trying to figure out where it goes in your head. She hasn't loved it into existence. But she is making a space for it. And, by extension, for me. Update 4. Brunch first. I wore sleeves like I promised, playing one, not the unhinged cat print, because Mom's friends sis have hawk eyes and the kind of smiles that collect things to talk about later. We met at this airy cafe near the river where the chairs are always a bit too low and everything comes with a sprig of something edible. Mom did her hostess glide, kisses, well you look well, weather, parking. Julie from tennis was in a visor the size of a satellite and had already staked a claim on the corner with the best breeze. I could feel her gaze sticking to my arms like Velcro, waiting. It was almost fine. We did eggs and small talk and someone said, do you think the council will fix the potholes before Christmas? Like it was international politics. Then the new waiter, bless his enormous soul, came over with more ice water, clocked my wrist when I passed a glass, and just went, love your cats, in that breezy way people do when they're not looking for permission. You can hear a napkin breathe. Julie rotated like a lighthouse. Cats? She repeated. Mom's hand found my knee under the table and pressed, just once, like a little anchor. I could have lied. I could have said it was a screensaver. Instead I rolled my sleeve a fraction so just the top of an ear winked. Julie inhaled like I'd show her a live grenade. Oh, you've... She flapped a hand at the empty space, looking for the worst possible word. Done that. I took a sip of my orange juice because it's heroic sometimes to chew a straw instead of someone's head. Mom beat me to it anyway. She put her fork down very carefully and said, she's had it done, yes. It's hers. And we're having brunch. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It landed like a paperweight. Julie blinked and fished for a different angle, something about future employment, I think, and Lorraine saying that Lorraine with the pearl studs just tipped her chin and said, "Oh, sweetheart, my son-in-law is covered and he's a pediatrician." Then she winked at me very outrageously, and if I could have mailed her flowers through time I would have. Later, by the counter, when the F-Bose machine did its slow ping-pong, Mum muttered, well, like she was testing the weight of the word. In the car she didn't say anything until the second roundabout, then, thank you for humoring me with the sleeves. I told her the world didn't collapse. She made a tiny HM that translated to, I noticed. The cat rescue show rolled up a week later like an exam you've actually studied for. The skin had done its peel and settle, the boys looked like themselves again, peering up from under my sleeve whenever I forgot I was trying to look casual. The gallery was a bright shoebox above a plant shop, the floorboards old enough to creak a room be it under your feet. There were fairy lights, because of course there were, and a table of finger food that made Mum visibly relax, mini sausage rolls, free dips, someone's ambitious pesto pinwheels. She clocked the toothpicks like a general surveying terrain. The artist had printed a little placard for my piece, Two Brothers 2026, black and gray, and I stared at it too long because seeing your cats described like art makes your brain do a funny backflip. There were framed photos of other pieces too, a jaguar crouched through ferns, a sopping cherub on someone's calf, a very earnest croissant. A corner had been given over to the rescue blankets, a goldfish bowl of raffle tickets, a pen with two wobble-headed kittens sleeping like commas. Dad, who swore all morning he was just coming to support the cause and hover near the sausage rolls, yacht bent in half within 3 minutes, huge man trying to make himself small so he didn't scare kittens the size of his hands. One climbed onto his hat with the solemnity of a flag raising and fell asleep there. He didn't move for 20 minutes. My heart made a weird new sound. Grandma arrived like a celebrity with my auntie on one arm and her walking stick in the other, ankle wave flashing with every dignified step. The artist all but knelt to greet her. "We owe you everything," they joked, and Grandma beamed like a lighthouse. I introduced Mum, and for a second I thought that would be the moment everything went brittle, but the artist just stuck out their hand, warm and normal, and said, "We made your daughter cry, but like, in a therapeutic way." Mum sniffed. "Sounds about right," and it was so dry I had to cough to hide a laugh. People wondered, pointed, asked questions. A woman with a toddler on her hip cried at a memorial piece and wiped her eyes with the hem of her dress without shame. Mum drifted between the food and the walls, sometimes stopping, sometimes not. When she paused in front of mine, I watched her face in the glass. All I could see was my cats reflected over her shoulder like a little chorus. She reached up, very lightly, and traced the air where a whisker was. "You didn't make them saints," she said. "You left them a bit naughty." It sounded like a compliment. The rescue lady did the raffle in a voice already going ragged with hope. "Hamper. Voucher for dog grooming, framed print." I bought 2 tickets, Mum bought 5, muttering something about supporting the decent people in the city. When they pulled the tattoo voucher a tidy little hour, nothing wild, the rescue lady peered into the bowl, spun it like a bingo cage and read out Mum's name. The room clapped. Mum froze. It was exactly the face she makes when she finds a spider in the laundry, not fear, per se, but the immediate need to delegate. She looked at me, then at my auntie, then at Grandma like, "Surely one of you wants this contaminated object." The artist, who had zipped over with a grin, said gently, "You can pass it along, of course. Or you can keep it and use it for something you'd like." Mum opened her mouth on an automatic no, then shut it again like she'd remembered something bleak and pry it. "Can it be small?" she asked, quieter than weather. The artist smiled like that was the best question in the world. "We do a thriving trade in small." We ended up scribbling names on back of business cards like Victorians, at a ball. Auntie, overhearing all of this, pulled a folded scrap from her bag, waddle sprigs in pencil, quick and tender, and slated towards me as if this were a heist. For later, she mouthed. Grandma put her foot up on a chair and showed her wave to a man with a navy anchor on his forearm. They high-fived like old pirates. Dad finally stood up, kitten migrating to his shoulder like a tiny parrot, and the room did the collective awe noise humans can't stop making. "Don't get attached," Mom told him without heat, which in Mum speak means she was already calculating litter boxes. On the way home, car full of time and pastry and the specific silence of people who have had a day, Mum said, "If I were to, hypothetically, get something, it wouldn't be where people could. You know." She gestured vague circles in front of her like swatting flies. "It could be for me." I kept my eyes locked on the road and did not move a muscle. "Hypothetically," I said, very convincingly casual. That night she was in her sewing room longer than usual. The door was open. I went to ask if she wanted tea and stopped because she was hunched over her desk, lamplight pool in gold, drawing on a scrap of tracing paper. It was rubbish because she can't draw to save herself her words, not mine, but under the wonkiness it was unmistakable, not a dragon, not the whole roar of it, just a smooth curve like the first stroke of a scale, and beside it a tiny wave. She looked up like I'd caught her shoplifting. I held up my hands. No witnesses, I said. Not even the cat one, she said, flicking a finger at my sleeve. Especially not that menace. She slid the paper into a book and closed it on impulse, like any moment it would sprout legs and run. We booked her consultant next morning. She pretended she was doing it because she couldn't be bothered dealing with a voucher on our fridge for a year. I pretended I believed her. We chose the inside of her left arm, high and soft, where a sleeve kisses when you reach for something on the top shelf. The artist didn't blink at the odd request. A whisper, they called it, sketching, and Mum looked at the pencil like it might wriggle off the page. Grandma insisted on coming. If I survive the 50s girl with a sewing needle, I can survive a gloved professional and some antiseptic, she declared, and who was going to argue with that? Mom held my hand, very lightly, the whole time. She didn't watch. She stared at the ceiling and told the story of Uncle Paul into the middle distance, how he used to put the dragon to sleep with a cold spoon from the freezer when it itched. The artist said, Paul had taste, and Mom made a huffing sound that started like a laugh and ended like she'd swallowed something too hot. When it was over, she looked. Just the curve and the wave, no bigger than a 10-cent piece, tucked into the private geography of her arm. She exhaled. It's not loud, she said, which, again, translated to something else entirely. We went for gelato after because we are people who reward ourselves with frozen sugar. Mom's sleeve slipped up when she reached for a napkin and the tiniest flash of line showed, and she did this startled thing and tugged it down and then didn't. She let it sit where it was. Don't glow, she said without looking at me. I didn't. Much. There's a crate in the laundry now. It arrived temporarily because the rescue lady had Foster in need of a quiet place for a week and I have the week off anyway and Dad already has the hat. He's an older ginger boy with an ear like a potato chip and a purr that rattles the washing machine. He and my two are doing the diplomatic door sniff and singing under their breath like rival choirs. Mom named him Dennis because it made her laugh. She cut up an old flannelette sheet into squares and stitched the edges while the kettle boiled, muttering about fraying. I caught her in the hallway tonight, lights down low, checking his water before bed. She brushed his forehead the way she did in the vet's office and said, almost to herself, all right. I see the point, again, like the universe had offered her a second go and she'd taken it. We have Mom's tiny aftercare note pinned to the fridge under a magnet shaped like a magpie. She pretends it isn't hers. The voucher stub is also there with a date scribbled next to it, a time in 4 weeks, for touch-up if needed, which is code Form 80, maybe something else. The sleeves she made me are folded on the whole table like offerings. The boys have stopped caring unless the second skin makes a weird noise when I move. The house feels the same and not the same. Every now and then I catch Mom looking at my arm and then down at her own, and I can see the math happening in real time. Old stories, new ones, how they fit. She hasn't loved any of it into existence. But she is drawing, now. And letting some lines stay. Update 5. Dennis was meant to be a week and then we were politely going to hand him back like you return a mixing bowl to a neighbor. 48 hours in, Dad fell asleep in the recliner with Dennis balanced like a hot water bottle on his chest, and when I tried to lift the cat off to go to bed, Dad did that sleepy, grumpy child voice no and folded his arms over Dennis like he was guarding crown jewels. The rescue asked if we could take him to our vet to check his chip details were current, just in case someone out there was looking. We did, figuring it would be some nice, neat admin task. The number on his file had been disconnected 4 years. Our vet, who knows everyone and their cousin, made 2 calls and somehow stitched a line from an old address to a woman named Ruth living 2 suburbs over. She came with that face you get when you want to believe and are scared too. She stood in our laundry doorway and said his name in this tiny voice, Dennis? And his head popped up like a meerkat. It was like someone adjusted a radio between stations and suddenly the sound went clear. He headbutted her throat so hard she had to take a step back. She told us, with all these little pauses for swallowing, that he'd been her dad's cat. Her dad had gone into care at the start of the year, past last month, and Dennis had bolted during the move. She'd papered half the suburb, put him on all the lost groups, and then got guilt-tired. Now here he was, smelling like our pantry and Dad's shirt. She cried. I cried. Mom did that thing where her mouth works like she's chewing gum she doesn't have. We made tea at the speed of people who need to do something with their hands. Ruth looked around our ridiculous cat-proofed house, the polite barricades and the stupid laser toy Dad pretends he hates, and said, he's happy. The vet had already told her he was older than she thought, a bit arthritic, very safe and very loved. I promised Dad I'd make sure Dennis was okay, she said, stroking the ear that folds like a crisp. I don't think I could do better than this. She kissed the top of his head, left us his original name tag Denzel, if you can believe, shortened by popular vote, and walked out with this weird lightness on her that made me feel like the house had gotten bigger. Mom wrote to the rescue that afternoon and used the word adopt like it might explode. On paper Dennis is ours. In practice he just keeps climbing into the fruit bowl and pretending to be a very disobedient orange. Mom's touch-up appointment rolled around faster than she liked. She tried to pretend all week it was solely to deal with any inevitable imperfections, which is rich when the thing is the size of a 10-cent piece and looks like it was drawn by a whisper with a degree. She wore her nicest linen like that would armor her against catching feelings. Grandma and I flanked her like overexcited security guards. The artist had set up the little station and put a chair for Grandma dead center, which she took with the authority of someone arriving at her usual pew. The touch-up itself was 20 seconds of breath and antiseptic, and then there was this silence where Mom was staring at the almost nothing on her arm like it had said her name out loud. The artist cleared their throat. If you wanted to add anything small, this is the least annoying time to do it. It was offered like you offer a biscuit to someone who says they don't eat sweets, while sliding the plate to their side of the table. Mom did twitch. Then she said, very softly, a dot. Just there, and tapped the air where the curve of the scale rounds back on itself. 4. Start and stop. 4. Him. She didn't say Paul's name, but it was sitting on the tip of her tongue like a peppermint you can't quite get to. The artist put one tiny dot, so slight it's practically a thought, and Mom made the smallest sound I've ever heard from her, like a wire being plucked once. We went for gelato again because we are nothing if not consistent, and she leaned her forearm on the table with her sleeve pushed just high enough that the line could breathe. It looked like punctuation. Like she'd put a period somewhere the story needed one, not to end it, but to give it shape. Dad went into the shed that night and came back with a box I'd never seen, shoebox, old, soft with age, the lid taped once and then never again. He put it on the kitchen table like it might complain. Your grandmother gave this to me when we moved in here, he said. Said to hold on to it until your mom looked like she could hold on to it. He cut the tape very carefully, because Dad is tender when it matters and clumsy when it doesn't. Inside, a Polaroid of Uncle Paul next to the world's least legal-looking tent with two massive sunburned idiots grinning at nothing, a belt buckle shaped like a roaring lion, a library card with the corners chewed, and a school exercise book with a blue dragon drawn over and over, always starting at the same curve, always looking like it wanted to wriggle off the page. Mom didn't touch anything at first. She did that scan you do of rooms when you've walked in and gone, what am I doing here again? Then she reached for the book like it was hot and flipped to the middle. The dragon was there, in biro and fury. She smiled and it looked like somebody had opened a window. He could never finish the tale, she said. He'd get bored. And he took the book gently and said, would you be alright if I scan this? And Mom nodded, watery but sure. 2 days later she came back with fabric. The dragon, cleaned up just enough to be his, screen printed on a small square, and we ironed it to the inside lining of Mom's favorite blazer, right over where her heart sits when she buttons it. She slid her arm in after and batted the place once, like you do when you leave the house and check your keys. Unreal and completely ordinary, all at once. The wattle sprigs have moved from Annie's paper to my wall, taped by the mirror where I do my hair, into something that passes for presentable. They lift like smoke from the corner of my sleeve in her sketch, a little art that would sit shy of the cats without crowding them, just a brush of light. I booked the consult and told Mom before she could see the reminder on our shared calendar and go weirdly quiet. She nodded in this very adult way and then followed me down the hall to say, can it not get carried away? And I grinned and put my hand up like a scout. I promised. We talked placement over toast like we were arguing over where to put a lamp, moving my arm this way and that, Mom adjusting my elbow, like she was positioning a pattern piece on fabric. It felt elaborative. Which is just a fancy word for domestic magic. Somewhere in the middle of all that normalness, life lobbed in 2 side plots like it had been saving them. 1. The tennis club. I went to bake Mom up because her car was in for a service and she hates waiting rooms like they're a moral failing. I stood by the courts pretending to understand double strategy while Lorraine missed an easy volley and swore so cheerfully I nearly applauded. Julie from tennis, visor glimmering like a UFO sighting, clocked me and zeroed in with that smile of hers that is 90% enamel and 10% filing system. Show us, she trailed, and for a second I didn't know if she meant the cats or my inhibition. Mom must have sensed the shift because she drifted over, towel around her neck, cheeks red in that rosy apple way, and just moved so she was between us. If you mean the tattoo, she said in a voice with no loose threads, no. We've put it away for now. Lorraine joined, wiped her face with her skirt like a pirate, and said, Jules, honestly, your face is tattooed. Julie spluttered. It's microblading, she said, like the word, had a diploma. It's different. Lorraine lifted her brows at me so high they almost met her visor. Nothing wrong with a little ink on a good canvas, she said. Mom made a noise that could have been a laugh if someone gave it a glass of water. On the way home, she rolled her sleeve up to her elbow to cool down and her tiny dot winked at me, and she didn't yank the fabric down when she saw me see it. Progress dressed as air. Shoo, the rescuer rang. Not a crisis, just an idea. They were running a station to make blankets and little heat pack covers for the colder nights. Could my aunt help wrangle the pattern people? Could Mom possibly host one in her sewing room, bring the people who own seam reppers and opinions? She said no before the woman had finished the sentence, which is Mom for yes, I just need to test the strength of the ground. We put out biscuits and those soft lollies that taste like nostalgia. 3 ladies from the op shop came, 2 teens from down the street with hands all thumbs, and Lorraine, who sews like she plays tennis, enthusiastically. 10 minutes in, there was an unfamiliar knock and inside Julie, visor off, hair flat and strange without its usual scaffolding, holding a Tupperware of something slice adjacent. I make a mean hedgehog, she said, and her voice had a tremor in it like she'd taken the wrong turn and ended up in a different kind of courage. Mom blinked, then said, come in that exact tone you use on timid cats. We stitched and bitched. Someone's thread kept knotting and Mom leaned over, cool fingers, gentle, said, no, love, hold it like this, and the girl's whole face changed. Julie told us, out of nowhere, about her son in London and the tattoo she'd told him not to get that he got anyway, tiny initials for a granddad who taught him to bake bread. Then she was quiet a long time like she'd tripped over something invisible and was choosing to keep walking. When they left, Mom shut the door and leaned on it in the theater lean of someone pretending to be exhausted when they're actually something else. That was not terrible, she said. Which in Mom is akin to sobbing into a hanky. Dad, who up until now has been content to be head of sausage rolls and cat hats, stood in the hall the other night watching me tape Andy's waddle drawing back up after the blue tack failed in the heat. You keep putting it there, he said. Like you're trying to get used to it being in your reflection before it's in your skin. I stared at him because sometimes the man drops a sentence like that out of mid-air and then acts like he's asked if we're out of milk. You're allowed to like it, he added, softer. You're allowed to like things that are part of you before anyone else does. And then he attempted to open a jar and made it my problem when it wouldn't budge, which saved me from having to say anything clever back. Tonight, Dennis fell asleep inside the laundry basket on top of a mountain of clean tea towels like a Roman general on a campaign. My 2 lay just outside like attendants, occasionally stretching one paw in as if to confirm he was still there. Mom walked past, rolled her eyes, and then fetched an old cushion she hates and tucked it under his chin so the tea towels wouldn't get hair, which is the most Mom thing she could possibly have done. When she straightened, her sleeve slid and I saw the curve in the dot again, a private constellation under the lamplight. She caught me looking and didn't flinch. You've got your consult tomorrow, she said. I nodded. She touched the edge of my waddle sketch with one finger like blessing or editing. Leave the bottom leaf off, she murmured. Let the cats be the thing that touches your wrist. The rest can hum above it. It was practical and it was poetry and it was her. The house is the same and not the same. The old stories are still here, Paul's dragon whispering from inside a blazer pocket, Grandma's way flashing under a sensible sock, Dad's big hand going careful when he passes a bowl with kittens in it. The new ones are laying themselves down next to them, not loud, just sure. I keep catching Mom with that look again, the one she gets with new furniture, measuring. Only now, sometimes, she smiles like she's found the right wall.